Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Menna Rawlings. I think, as most of you know, I'm the new President of Queen's. I think I can still say new, even though it's been 6 months. And it's brilliant to be here and to be organising this event, so we can talk about some of the issues facing women that we're all very familiar with. Thank you for the men who've come today as well, the male allies. It was great to see you here. Thank you for your support. So, what do you want to talk about today? Well, I was reflecting on where are we today as women in the world, and on the one hand there's so much good news, right? I mean, look at these amazing people, look at what women are achieving in different fields of life, the arts, STEM, tech, government, diplomacy. Look how far we've come, but at the same time there is a sense that women's rights are under attack in different ways, in different places around the world, and some of the optimism that we might have felt as young women entering the workplace, I think, can feel more challenging with the backlash against diversity and inclusion initiatives, a slight sense that in some areas and places feminism has become almost a dirty word. So how do we juggle those challenges, and how do we retain confidence and influence and impact when things can feel really difficult? So, on that note, I'm going to ask each of our amazing panellists just to introduce themselves, and then we'll start the conversation. We're going to speak here for anything up to an hour. We'll see how it goes, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. So start thinking about what you'd like to ask these amazing women today. But let's get them started. Over to you. Angela, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much for the lovely introduction, Menna, and thank you all for coming. I'm Angela Chan, Professor Angela Chan. I have to say that because it's new, never stop learning. I'm currently Head of Inclusive Futures at the CoStar National Lab for Creative Technology, which opens in Pinewood this autumn. And we're there to sort of drag the creative industries kicking and screaming into the future. I've spent 30 years in television, working as things like Head of Creative Diversity at Channel 4. I was a filmmaker and a commissioning editor and exec producer before that.
Thank you. Joanna?
I'm Joanna Scanlan. I was part of the first cohort of women at this college as an undergraduate, which is an experience in itself, and we have a couple of other of us present here. Very particular experience, I think. I'm a mainly film and television actress and a writer for screen. Before I became an actress and writer for telly, I was an academic briefly, teaching on a performing arts degree at De Montfort University, and then I worked at the Arts Council in cross-disciplinary work. So I kind of touched a little bit on academia and a little bit on government and politics, really, through that job, which both of which were very, very interesting and have formed a foundation, as it were, for my acting life.
Hello everybody, my name is Hannah Fry. It's possible that you've come across various bits that I've done with the BBC or social media videos that I've made online, but as I like to remind audiences, I am actually also a proper person because I'm a Professorial Fellow at Queen's College, like here, at Cambridge University, and like you, Menna, I like to think of myself as new here, even though I've been here 6 months longer than you have. But I am a mathematician over in the maths department, where I am a professor in the public understanding of mathematics, trying to, I think, break down the barriers of this subject that I think is this really big driver of the economy and of sort of, you know, general education and prosperity for the country, and I guess try and sort of give it a slightly less bad reputation than it seems to have got itself.
Brilliant, thank you. Helen.
Thanks, Hannah. What an amazing treat to be here with all of you. So I feel very honoured in all sorts of ways. I'm Helen MacNamara. I was the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, which is how I know Menna and why she's made me come here. But before that, I did all sorts of random, weird and wonderful things before I kind of fell into the civil service. I spent most of my civil service career split between the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, where I worked on the 2012 Olympics, amongst other things, and then in the Cabinet Office, which is how I ended up being the Deputy Cabinet Secretary when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, which was a wild old ride. Not unreasonably, and also not on my own. I have left government after that experience, and I am now chair of Shelter, the housing and homelessness charity, which I am very passionate about. I also chair a little think tank, because you can't stop messing about in government once you've been in it. And I've just launched a podcast with my friend Clare Watson, who also worked for Boris Johnson, so this is a shameless plug for that too.
Corin.
Hi everybody, it's great to be here. I'm Corin Robertson. I was a student here from 1990 to 1994, and so it's great to be back. And I've had a career in diplomacy, so I'm heading off to Japan as ambassador in the summer, but joined straight from university, actually straight from Queen's, into the Foreign Office as it was, as a fast stream graduate, and have had an exciting time along the way in Canada, Brussels, Mexico, and this will be second time to Japan and dealing with various bits of policy along the way. But yeah, always actually this sort of issue, whether it's inclusion more broadly or gender, has been something I've cared a lot about.
Brilliant, thank you all. I think they're all very modest actually in how they describe themselves. So Joanna, also a winner of a BAFTA a few years ago, and we're going to come to it, but just appeared in the wonderful show Riot Women, which I'm sure many of you have seen. But we will touch on all of that as we go through. So I'm going to start with a random selection. Hannah, I'm going to come to you first. And in fact, just coming where you left off in your introduction. So I'm so interested that so much of your work is about taking something that feels inexplicable to lots of people and making it relevant. That is the study of maths, as you say, and the sharing of public understanding. Is there anything maths could bring to some of the challenges we face in the world right now, be that conflict or, the subject today, women's rights? How can it help us?
Gosh, okay. Make it easy for the beginning. Just fix everything for us. Okay, I don't know. I do think that there is a really fruitful advantage to I think maths can offer a new perspective on almost anything. I was talking the other day, I've been doing this programme on the BBC, a documentary series recently, about artificial intelligence and the way that it is splintering us apart from one another. The thing is that actually, if you look at the world from a sort of systems dynamics perspective, right, sort of like from a mathematical view, actually, a lot of the problems that we're facing at the moment, technology could be designed to bring us closer together. There are, we're sort of not forced into this path. If you started with a clean sheet of paper, you could make it where all of the AI chatbots that we're all talking to could be nudging us closer together rather than further apart. And in that system, I think, there's lots of mathematical ideas that could be really supportive. But I do sort of think, as we're going to come on to, I'm sure, we kind of find ourselves in this world with lots of tension, lots of sort of angst, lots of polarization, partly driven by mathematical algorithms that has got us there in the first place. And I think it's very difficult to get out of it. So no, I don't have an equation that's going to solve it. No.
Damn. So building on that, and just coming on to the brilliant AI Confidential that you just mentioned. I think one of the issues that came across in one of those programs was a woman actually who ran her own sort of chatbot company, who you spoke to on the beaches of California. And in the end, she said she'd sort of stepped back from it and decided not to do it anymore. And sort of, just raised the concern about an industry that is so dominated by men. We all know about the tech bros linked in different ways to political systems, particularly in the US. So, how can I put it? How safe are we in the hands of AI when it is essentially in the hands predominantly of men? And how sort of stark is that? And is there anything we could do about it?
Honestly, I'm really concerned about this.
Yeah.
The particular person that you're describing, she'd lost a friend of hers, a really close friend who had died unexpectedly, was hit by a car. And so she had created a chatbot. This is back in 2016, so it was a very kind of crude version of what we have now. And she'd created a sort of a kind of digital version of him that she could talk to based on the messages that they'd had together to really help her through that sort of acute phase of grief. And she thought then that actually there were people around the world who were also suffering from loneliness or grief or just needing that sense of feeling valued and having a human connection, that she could create an AI that would be able to fill in that space. And she was really kind of out there on her own at this point as an unusual female leader who was creating something that spoke to our emotions. And she was really heavily criticised about it. especially by lots of the sort of tech bros in Silicon Valley who were sort of, you shouldn't be anthropomorphizing this stuff, this isn't emotional, you shouldn't be doing any of this thing. And then as soon as ChatGPT came out and proved itself to be profitable, all of a sudden, all of that stuff gets like chucked out the window. Now, all of the kind of the companies that are led by these male tech bros are doing exactly the same thing, but they're doing it often without the safeguards and the kind of careful, well, the care ultimately that had been put into that product to try and support people who are going through times of crisis. Yeah. And I think that we're seeing this, I think we're just at the very beginning of this, of people talking about AI psychosis, of talking about AIs potentially being implicated in the suicide of individuals, or even in encouraging the Canadian school shooting. There's a big story at the moment about how OpenAI, they've been sort of talking to that then. And I think this is it, actually, is that the difference of not having female leads is that people are people, and people are going to look for emotional connections to things anyway. That is inevitable anyway, right? We're going to have a sort of emotional connection to the AI that we're talking to. It's just that I think that when women are in charge, we are way more capable of considering the angles of it to make sure that it is as safe as possible. And I think that this is, I really do think that we are heading down this track where there are a lot of people who I don't really trust very much, who are driving this with a sort of profit first, and kind of hang the consequences stuff. And it does really concern me that we're not hearing a diverse range of voices right at the top when we're designing our collective future.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring Angela in a sec, but is there anything within that gives you some optimism? I mean, when I look at people like you and some of our other amazing fellows and students, doing maths, doing STEM subjects here at Queen's and across Cambridge, you can see that there are plenty of women who are engaged in this world or want to get engaged. Do you see any sort of hope for more people sort of making it in this world? Or do you think more women specifically making it? Or do you think the sort of system is inherently biased in this field specifically against more women coming through?
I think that there are really good people who are not like this. And I would say actually that Queen's sort of gave us, I think, one of the greatest of them of all in Demis Hassabis.
Yes.
And I think that actually his team, there are a lot of women in his team. I think that he I think he stands out for me anyway. I think he stands out against the others. But yes, I do think that there is. I think that there is a bias against women, and maybe not necessarily in terms of who gets employed, who gets put forward. But I think there's a bias because I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting old and sort of hardening my views. But I think that there is a difference in the thing that women generally care about, and I think the thing that women generally care about does get shoved to the side by society and companies who are seeking profit.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Angela, let's bring you in. So, you've worked in a very different sector, the creative sector, done amazing jobs around inclusion, as you said, at places like Channel 4. And you're all about inclusive innovation and inclusive tech. So is there anything you could add to what Hannah said in terms of, ideally, because we don't want to be too depressing today, any
Sorry,
sort of... No, it's great to hear it, it's honest. But any sort of more green shoots in the creative industries, perhaps?
I'm weirdly optimistic. So within the National Lab, I stopped working in television in 2018 and I did my PhD at 47, finished last year. And I'd been doing diversity jobs for about 10 years. I sort of grew up in the same bit of television as you, in science programming and business, current affairs, and it was mainly male presenters and male execs. And I was brought up by an immigrant dad and a working class mum who always told me I could do anything. So when I got here, and I was JCL president in my first year, by the way, I went to governing body and it was all men, and I thought, what's this? I'd never encountered it before. And so Queen's really taught me to sort of hold my own, and I've carried on that way. And I think in television, I've seen it change over 20, 30 years, and it's given me the hope that actually you can change representation. And I didn't study STEM. I was 2 years doing English literature and 2 years doing social anthropology. But the hope for me is, A, anybody can work in STEM. It's everybody's concern how we are represented authentically. My concern is that, particularly with generative AI moving into the creative industries, people are generally quite lazy. And, you know, if you imagine the LLMs as the sort of infrastructure of the city. By the way, AI is a word a bit like transport, right? Do you know transport? Are you an expert in transport? Imagine trying to map that on. Right now, the infrastructure is biased. We're sort of building shanty houses on top to do different functions. But the universities have a really, really key role to play. So a lot of the money in innovation is flowing through universities and out to industry. We're sort of holding the purse. We run incubators. We're very concerned about the balance of that, how we encourage women to seek investment. That's a major kind of hurdle at the moment, both in growing people's confidence and making the investment available. I think the biggest risk is laziness, but we have to build the products that actually represent us properly. At the moment, I mean, I've been doing sort of little tests since about 2022 with all the major generative AI platforms. If you ask for a group of black women in a boardroom, you generally get the same black woman with different hair, same shoes. If you ask for disability, you'll still just get a wheelchair. So, you know, we need to build the products that reflect us, that represent society properly, and we can seek funding. So we've run over £100 million in the last few years, just to, you know, we have an AI and digital media inclusion, CDT, a Centre for Doctoral Training, that's going to train 80 PhDs over 8 years, a little army of people just thinking about this. So, you know, if you're in the university sector and thinking about going on to further study, you have a sort of personal responsibility to bang the drum, win funding, shape things as you want. So it is possible, but we're sort of tiny compared to big tech, and the speed with which all the big tech firms dropped their diversity programs and their inclusive innovation programs when Trump came in was absolutely alarming. I think everyone's sort of waiting for that wheel to turn and come back. But I think there's hope, but it is in the step-by-step work, the incubators, the PhDs, you know, and it starts with universities.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the backlash, if I may. And I mean the backlash that you've already referred to against diversity and inclusion. Did you generally feel that there is enough of a weight of opinion that we are a diverse nation, and showing that is really important in our arts and our theatre and our television?
We often get a really nasty backlash, particularly around disability. So I remember having a conversation with Strictly probably around the early 2000s about having a disabled person. There was a kids presenter with a limb difference at the time, and she used to get the most horrible things like, this is disgusting, don't let our children look at this. And like, we really had to fight over a number of years for that to become acceptable. So you meet the most disgusting viewer responses in disability, but there'll always be some people. But then actually the backlash to that is an incredible uplift when you have somebody succeed. So I think you have to always proceed. There's always going to be a few weird people who have things to say, but never mind. You know, and in terms of overrepresentation, or, I mean, it isn't really. It's just like, you know, if you see it on a global scale, if you see it on from the last sort of 50 years of television, you're just evening up the balance. Never mind.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Angela. So just staying with creatives for a moment, I'm going to turn to Joanna. And I was telling her that we did binge watch Riot Women in the last sort of 48 hours when I had a panic that she was coming and I hadn't seen it. And it was, as I said earlier on, absolutely brilliant. I think, you know, not everybody in this room obviously is my age, but hopefully you will get to my age. So I think some of the issues it raises about women of a certain age, you know, dealing with the menopause, with loss, with family breakups, and the importance and the value of female friendship. I mean, for me, some of that was like, you know, really sort of touched me very directly. Joanna, can you just tell us a little bit about Riot Women and, you know, how that was for you as a show? You had a line in it where you asked one of the other characters, you know, do women of my age, do we become invisible? I think Riot Women answered that for us, but what would be your sort of response?
You need Sally Wainwright here, don't you, for that question, because it's very much her work and her perception of the world. And it has had a backlash in terms of men who have said not all men are as heinous as every single one of the ones represented by Riot Women. I think, I mean, I don't know. The truth is, I think there's quite a lot of mythologizing around women's solidarity as friends. My experience is that friendship is a complicated process, and that women's friendships I mean, I have friends to this day that were my best friends when I was here. So they've lasted 40 plus years, and they're going to see me out, I know. So it's not that I don't believe in the longevity of friendship, but I believe in that each of us come from very different social and psychological positions, and negotiating who we are is actually probably our life's work, as in our differences. I mean, that's not different from what each of you, Hannah and Angela, have said in terms of polarisation is not going to work. I mean, I was very lucky and puzzled to be asked by the Bangor University Medical School, which is a new, they've only got 2 cohorts, so they're just starting out, if I would come and talk to them about storytelling and character, or how we work as actors with the notion of character, to the medical students. I don't really think. I mean, I would secretly have loved to have been a doctor, and I have lived a shadow life as a doctor, writing drama in a hospital. But it was very puzzling to me. And then when I did the day's teaching alongside all their professors, what they were working on was the notion of psychological safety, first and foremost. So how do you build psychological safety in a team? Now, I think that is actually to my mind, that is a female goal or intention, and perhaps wouldn't be so relevant to all professors who are trying to, all deans of medicine. Maybe they wouldn't be looking towards that. So then we start talking about, well, what is psychological safety? How do you build it? How do you make it possible that the most hierarchically lowly person in a team can prevent a very serious act of malpractice? How can they build that? So empathy, communication, trust. And when I thought about it, I thought the way I approach my self, actually, because in the end it comes down to responsibility for self, is to try and think, well, what are my values today? How do I reinforce are the values that I hold actually current to me, or are they something that I left behind a few years ago, or are they something I'm being hypocritical about? And if I know what my values are, then I can contribute that as a goal within a set of shared goals for that team, no matter what their intention is. And I think those sort of what are sometimes thought of as more soft skills, empathy, trust building, communication, active listening, all building towards psychological safety, can provide an environment that obviously avoids such, terrifying eventualities as medical malpractice, but also, I think, in a very small way, in a friendship group. And I think that's about honesty and with yourself. So, one of the things I was going to say today, because the whole question of impactful women, how do you become an impactful woman? I don't know if I am an impactful woman, but I like the idea. I stopped drinking when I was 29, not because I was an alcoholic, but actually because I was unwell. And I stopped drinking because I was unwell. And then when I got better, which was a sort of year or so later, I just thought, I don't like the taste of that. And I've never gone back. And I absolutely know that if I'd carried on drinking, I would have made no impact either on myself or any other person in the world. For me, it was getting to know myself. And for me, it was the social side of drinking that made it a great distraction. And as an actor, that would have been, it's a very sociable business. And I would have just been distracted from those intense goals, the sense of the ability to listen. Because when you don't drink, as anyone here who doesn't drink will know, is the point comes in the evening when quite early on sometimes, when the listening stops, And actually it's so important to listen to the people around you and communicate. So in terms of Riot Women, I think there are things in there that illustrate some of those points. But I do firmly believe that we have skills that we can make more conscious that build psychological safety, and that is the the starting point for making impact.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. And Joanna, you alluded to the fact you were part of the 1980 cohort of women, and great to see a couple of them here as well. And I held a dinner recently for the women of the 1980 cohort with some of my colleagues, which was lovely. But I was struck that 1980 was a very different world, and the difficulties that women faced in those days coming into a place like Queen's. When you come back, how does it feel? And what is there about, today's universities and today's ways of teaching that, you wish you could have had a bit more of back in the day?
Me?
Yeah, go on.
Golly. It was very difficult, actually, being first year of women. I applied to Queen's because it was the first year of women. And I'd grown up in that second wave of feminism. I had some fantastic women teachers in my secondary education. They were fired up by what was coming through in the second wave of feminism in the 70s. And it was a radical, radical world. Some of the things that people were talking about in those days would become shocking again if they were brought about now. So those teachers had made a big impact on me, and I wanted to be in the vanguard, and I wanted to be somebody who was pioneering. And I think in the long run, that has actually, in terms of Queen's, I'm an honorary fellow, I'm incredibly honoured and humbled by that. I can't believe the journey from the wreck that, I was in my first term through to being able to be here talking to you today, invited to be amongst such illustrious companions. But I think it's that resilience is so important, getting over big hurdles. And I think for some of us, there were big hurdles in that year group. And I'm proud to say that we have lost one of our number, very sadly. But the rest of us are still going, and a very, very impressive bunch of women. And I think I was told at the time that we were all admitted because we'd been head girls of our schools. I don't know if that was actually true, but I was head girl of my school. And they thought that was going to give us the qualities that were required to contend with the rugby club, the activities in the JCR, and that we were going to be somehow vocal and tough. And actually, I think that was misguided, and I think it was a big challenge for the college itself, and I think it was a shock for everybody. But here we are with the first woman president, and having been formed by two queens. So in a way, we have come up a very long way through thick and thin.
Yeah. And when we look around the room and see all of our amazing students, but all the women here, the fellows, our amazing staff, women are such an important part of this college now. And I think that's something we can all celebrate and be proud of. Thank you very much, Joanna. Right, I'm coming to the government end of the table. Well, ex-government and still government.
We're going to bring it back down again.
But, and we might come back to the sort of idea of resilience as well in this context. But, Helen, I think we've already mentioned your podcast that you've got running. I've just listened to episode 3. It's called In the Room, with one of your colleagues from Number 10 Days, Cleo Watson. Anyone who's interested in politics and what really goes on in Westminster and the cabinet rooms, do listen in. It's absolutely brilliant. I called you the Tess and Claudia of podcasts.
That's extremely flattering. She is very tall, though.
So just to come back to that idea of being in the room, I mean, certainly the impression, and my impression from having been in government, and Corin would say the same, is that it has diversified massively in this sort of period that we're talking about since the 80s. But, the closer you get to power, does it still feel a bit like a boys' network? And if so, I won't lead the jury, but if so, how do you deal with that, and how do you be impactful and find your voice in that sort of context?
That's a big question, Menna. So I joined the civil service in DCMS, Department of Culture, and at the time, Secretary of State was Tessa Jowell, and the Permanent Secretary was Sue Street. So I thought it was pretty normal, actually, and the creative industry's got many flaws, but actually quite a lot of very impressive, powerful women leaders. So I didn't really notice, to be honest, for the first 10 years. And I was young as well and didn't really pay attention and was marching about being an idiot, so didn't really notice all of the things that were going on in life. And had no children. And then, you know, time teaches you things, like when you go on maternity leave and somebody takes your job or gives you a pay cut, or, you know, all of those things happen. And the second bit of my civil service career, as I said, was mainly in the Cabinet Office. And I definitely noticed as I got closer and closer to actual power, not the illusion of power, how many fewer women there were, and also that the women were put in a particular place, and they definitely weren't listened to. And to try to kind of exert your power in those proper places, when I'm talking about kind of, you know, prime ministers, the small group around a prime minister, when you're talking about defence or security or real things that really matter, or the money, then you suddenly find the dynamic and the people mix and change, and I definitely saw that. And I think the kind of one of the many things that being at the heart of government during the COVID pandemic taught me was one of those, you know, Warren Buffett talks about when the tide goes out, you can see who's, you know, swimming with no clothes on. I think that's what he says. Maybe look it up. But you do really notice, you see the world as it is, not the world as you imagined it was. And one of the things that was shocking to me, and at that point I was, you know, very important person, very like used to being a woman, being in charge and getting what I wanted and saying what I think and doing all the arguing. And then suddenly I saw that actually the women had kind of disappeared. And not only the women disappeared, but the systems that I had really naively, even someone very literate about how government decision making works, very literate in it, I hadn't realised how inbuilt some of these things were. So to go back to your point, Hannah, that's the thing that scares the life out of me about AI, is all of these invisible things that are built into our world which make it much more difficult to be, not just be a woman, but be different in any way from the kind of heteronormative male, means that actually the world is built against you from the beginning. So really, you know, small and big things. So the reason for a long time we didn't have a chickenpox vaccine as part of our vaccine roster is because the time lost from the workforce of women having to take time out to look after sequential children who have chickenpox, and if you know about chickenpox, it's not a fun disease, it goes to the household, that was never factored in to the value for money costs. So right through all of the tiny spending decisions, and you have to really unpick, you kind of have to really lift the lid to find all these little tiny bits of thinking that have cumulatively added up to, the world doesn't work because it's designed that way. And I think that's the kind of both negative and also really heartening thing that I learned from my latter point of government when I was a Deputy Cabinet Secretary, is that the world is designed and you can change it. And that goes to the kind of, you know, one of the problems with generative AI and LLMs is because all we're doing is importing everything that has been written down now and then making that the default human. And so that is wildly in favour of the male view. It's wildly in favour of Western privilege. It's wildly in favour of all of these things. And we just have to think smart enough about, if you were in charge, because by the way, we are all in charge, how would you have systems and visible systems that actually make things fairer and right, or that you can even see what's going on? And I think that's one of the things that I learnt the hard way, was that there was the things that I thought I could see that weren't there, the things that I really hadn't looked at before when I really understood that the decision-making was much more skewed. And then, horror of horror, the conversations that men have between themselves, including about you, when you're not there.
Can you tell us a bit about Shelter? So you're now Chair of Trustees for the Shelter charity for homelessness. How are you finding it? What are the issues around housing security, particularly facing women, but generally? And, you know, where is the hope in terms of tackling some of those issues?
Yes, absolutely. So I chair the Board of Trustees at Shelter. It is the honour of my life to do it, actually. It's an extraordinary organisation. We are so lucky of the generosity of the people and the kindness of the people in this country who are prepared to give. Quite a lot of our money comes from people who don't pay top rate tax, and they give us money every month to help us fix the housing crisis. And Shelter was born out of the kind of 1960s horror reaction to a drama, actually. It's a bit like the post office. Political drama and drama can create huge social change. And Shelter came out of a drama called Kathy Comes Home. We were in the middle of talking to some other people about actually trying to make some of those kind of dramatic moments come to life again. Because one of the things that we have, sort of through good and bad reasons, as a society created, is a culture where housing is not available for everyone. And that is by kind of a whole series of rational and then irrational choices, we have this extraordinary situation where it is just harder to get a house in our G7 nation than it is any others. And like I'm looking around this room, I don't need to tell the young people in this room how difficult this is. It is, and we've decided to do it. So at Shelter, we focus much more on what are we going to do to fill the gap where there's no social homes. So the people who, not only do they have everything else stacked up against them in life, but they don't have anywhere to live. I'm going to do a really rash thing now. So I've been chair of Shelter for 1.5 years, and hopefully I'll be chair for another 4.5 years. And one of the reasons I'm doing it is because I spent unfortunately for me, very brief time when I was working in government as the Director General for Housing and Planning, and I was the Director General for, so I was the most senior civil servant in charge of housing when the Grenfell fire happened. And that thing, obviously, just stays with you in your soul for a long time, and so it should. But I have decided that in my time at Shelter, the one thing I'm going to do is that by the time I stop being chair of Shelter, the number of children in temporary accommodation will have started to go down. I have no idea how I'm going to do this, but I am really sure that we have, as a society, got to find ways of making it different, because unless we are able to provide opportunities for children who all they have done is been born, that they have got to be able to get the opportunities that should be available to them, and the home is the beginning, middle and end of that. And it's really, there are some absolutely petrifying statistics. The number of children in inner cities, there's like some classrooms where 30 to 40% of the classroom are kids who don't have a permanent home. It's genuinely, if you haven't really faced into the housing emergency and how it affects those most disadvantaged in our society, it is worth looking into it, because all of us are going to have to make some sacrifices in order to fix this problem. Some of them are more easy than others. There are some really obvious ones, and I've got a list for the government which I'm fighting about at the moment. But it's going to take a national effort for us to fix this thing, and fix it we should.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. It's really powerful. Thanks, Helen. And then last but not least, by any means, Corin Robertson. So as already mentioned, Corin will be going to Japan as ambassador in a few months' time, over the summer, I think, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think it's a continuation of more women getting more senior roles in our diplomatic service and around the world, even if only 20% of ambassadors globally are female. So we've still got a long way to go. Corin, can I just start by asking you about, and it comes right back a bit to my first question to Hannah, about the world that we're in, and how can sort of women keep having impact in this world. So as a senior British female diplomat, in an era of strongman politics, do women's voices matter? Is there still enough focus on gender issues in foreign policy in the UK and overseas? And how do you sort of see that through your roles?
Nice, easy question there. So yes, I think if you look at the state of the world around us, the geopolitical, geo-economic upheaval, it's more important than ever that there are female voices at the table, and you need a diverse range of views. You need to ensure that nobody is excluded from that really challenging set of issues and that debate, and trying to find a way forward, and that people feel safe to be able to put themselves forward. It's really hard, I think, what you said about the rollback of rights, and we're seeing it obviously on gender, on equality more broadly, on LGBT rights as well. People saying it's a rise of populism, people feeling that, equality represents the erosion of traditional values and all those things. So whatever is going on underneath that populism, and it's different in different countries, it's there. But it does make it even more important that we're making progress. And you just look at the data and evidence again of the importance of having, say, women at the table when it comes to peace negotiations. I think it's something like if women are involved in a negotiation for peace in a conflict, it's 30%. The peace agreement is 35% more likely to last more than 15 years. And that's, again, you've got that diversity of people around the table thinking about what is it that makes a good peace agreement stick. And it's thinking about things like inclusion and communities, as well as the kind of, disarmament and and it's not, as you say, that all men would only be thinking about the harder edge stuff. But unless you've got that diversity and you've got women at the table as well as men, you're not going to have necessarily an agreement that sticks as well. So we know it's more important than ever to have women and the female voice heard as we're sort of facing these global issues, whether it's climate change, whether it's conflict, whatever it may be. And we also know that women and girls are disproportionately more likely to be negatively impacted by conflict and poverty. And, we see it, the rise of sexual violence in conflict, and we see it on a daily basis. Just in the UK, the number of phone calls to the crisis line that rose during COVID, any kind of situation of conflict, poverty, women and girls tend to be more affected than men. So it matters. But I think the trends that you kind of seeing, really interesting trends, obviously the gender bashing stuff that we've sort of been touching on, which is sort of, defend the patriarchy, and that's kind of a powerful minority of men. You get sort of gender washing, which is sort of interesting and often happens more in authoritarian regimes than perhaps in many democracies, where you get sort of, trying to make your country look like it's more modern and with the programme by putting women into roles but who don't necessarily have much say. And then you've also got the rise of the strong woman, actually. So strongman politics. You've also then got strong women, whether it's, Meloni perhaps in Italy, Marine Le Pen in France, which is another phenomenon. Maybe Takaichi will wait and see in Japan as well. So there's quite a lot of interesting trends. So I think, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say I think there's lots of different things happening. I think there has been real progress, and I think we shouldn't forget that. There are lots of challenges, but if you look back to 1995, and there was the Beijing Declaration on women, peace and security, and since then you kind of look at the number of countries that have got legislation now on gender-based violence, or legislation around equality and economic empowerment, police who have training around sexual violence. I mean, it's the progress has been huge, and you've got kind of, the UN and countries, the likes of the EU, the African Union, that have a policy that they will never send a delegation to negotiate something unless there is, a gender balance in that delegation. And we were caught out by this. I don't know if you remember. I think that was not that long ago. It feels like it was only a few years ago that we sent a delegation to New York from the UK to, I think it was a conference on women, peace and security, and there was a moment where all the delegates looked round at themselves and realised there wasn't one woman in the delegation. So that was a bit of a wake-up call, because we thought we were the good guys, I think, as the UK in this debate. But actually, there was a moment where we realised, actually, it won't happen naturally. You've got to actually make it happen. So that's why, you've got to have sort of diverse shortlist. You've got to actively challenge yourselves on the makeup. But I think it's still sobering. You've still got, I think, of world leaders, something like 29 world leaders are women, 6.6 or 6.5% of global 500 CEOs are women, parliamentarians 26% or something globally. So, and I think as the UN women have said that if we carry on at this rate, we won't have gender equality for at least another century. So we've got to keep going, because it's that diversity, it's that having women and men at the table, it's that diversity that kind of makes countries and economies stronger.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And then last question, then we are going to open it up, so get your questions ready. Was just about sort of the nature of diplomacy, I suppose. And I was reading a book recently by a former male diplomat. It's called The Ambassadors by Robert Cooper. And he's got a lovely line in there about diplomacy not being a science, saying it's an art. And that, we focus a lot on sort of precision and analysis traditionally in diplomacy. But it feels to me like it's becoming a more open profession. And he said that, empathy and the ability to engage and communicate with different people is also at the heart of what makes a good diplomat. And it made me wonder if, being frank, if women are just like better diplomats, and like in 50 years, women will just taken over the world, because ultimately it goes back to, I think, some points that you were making about sort of how women create this sort of psychological space and just communicate in different ways. I mean, are women better at it?
So I think, and I'm slightly conscious that in our conversation we've been quite binary, haven't we, in the way we've talked about men and women. And I think it's because we're all sort of speaking quite quickly. But I know plenty of women that don't create psychological safety, and I know plenty of men who bring empathy to the table. So I mean, I think we're all talking in shorthand. So I think everybody can recognise that
Overlapping spectrums.
Overlapping spectrum. So I think the key thing is that understanding of what are the skills that you need to do the job. And I think probably when you and I joined the Foreign Office, it was a certain skill set that was expected. I don't think empathy or building community or kind of listening to people, actually listening might have been there as a, But actually, I think it was a different set of skills that were probably prioritised, which is why there weren't many women, women back then in senior roles, as well as obviously there was a ban on marriage until 1973, I think it was, wasn't it? Any woman had to resign on marriage until 1973. So when you joined in 1994 or 19 whatever it was.
89.
Okay. You kind of, I mean, my intake was one of the first, I think, that was 50-50 graduates, men and women. In fact, I can see one of my fellow intake sitting in the third row. But actually, if you looked up above you, there were no role models. There was nobody. You kind of thought, that was sort of, we talked about your background and that sense of imposter syndrome. I was kind of a Sheffield lass from a comprehensive school. When there were no women above me, I thought, oh my God, what am I doing here? And when will they discover that I don't belong? So I do think I don't think men are better than women, but I do think that you do need that range of skills. You need that gender balance at the table as well. You need a mixed. You need different voices. Otherwise, you risk everybody saying the same thing and ending up with a really bad outcome.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, panel. You've been amazing so far. Really, interesting, inspiring conversation. So we're going to open it up. I think, if I may, I'll probably take, if it's all right with the panel, 2 or 3 questions at the same time. Perhaps you could specify if it's just a sort of general question and one of us pick it up, or if you have got a specific question for one of the panel, do say. So, who wants to go first? We have some roving mics up there. Who's first? If you don't mind just saying who you are, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Queen's alumni, and I want to ask a general question to all the panelists. Thank you so much for the discussion. It's such an honor to be the first who is asking questions. Sorry, I might be nervous. So you mentioned the project in the beginning. It's actually, I know the founder of the project because we encountered each other. It's called Replica, and the founder of this project has raised investment not so long ago, and she's a very successful AI founder now in US. Mostly because she decided to play by male rules in the industry. Mm-hmm. And my question is, how do you balance between values that might be more female-led with male rules of play?
Do you want to go?
Oh, no, you're right. You did tell me. Sorry.
Do you want to just jump in on that one? No, go on.
Okay, so I think in the tech industry, that's a whole different world. But one thing that I do think, just as like a little glimmer of optimism in this, I think that having a female perspective and caring about things that have not been cared about in the past actually can be a bit of a superpower. Because it means that you are offering something which people haven't seen before. I mean, we were talking about science television, okay? Like, science television, when I sort of kind of got into it, the whole history of science television was the same. It was a very important man standing on a mountain telling us all how clever he was, right? That was it. That was absolutely it. But there was nothing that was like, actually, why don't we just have a conversation like you're human? Why don't we just have it more of a conversation rather than sort of a broadcast? And like, I don't think there's anything particularly interesting or novel about that, because that's sort of how I think all women live their life. But because there hadn't been female science presenters in quite the same way, right? Suddenly it's this really original. Everyone's like, oh, it's just completely new what you're doing. It's not new, it's just female, like, frankly. And so I think that there are certain situations, and I agree with you about the Replica. She was playing the male game, I agree. But I think her product was fundamentally more human, more female, more empathic than the other things that were out there. And so I think if you get it right, you can make this a distinguishing feature of what you have to offer, because the world hasn't seen it before.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll take another couple. There's one here, and then just next to you there, then we can just share the mic. Yeah. Yes, lady in the red top, and then just here.
Hello, I'm Rachel. I'm Queen's 1986. I'd like you to imagine, and I'm sorry if this makes you feel slightly nauseous, because it would me, that you have a 15-minute sit down with Donald Trump. What is the one topic that you would like to go into with him where you think you might be able to make a difference?
Thank you. Hi, my name's Emily, and I now help people set up businesses, particularly women, which is awesome. So and thank you for the conversation, it's amazing. One of the things that was kind of dawning on me is that there seems to be almost like an underlying assumption that some of these traits that women on aggregate might care more about, like psychological safety and empathy and listening, all those things, are almost at the expense of profit or at the expense of, you know, decision making that we need, that kind of thing. Whereas actually, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I actually think if you look at the data, women are better investors, they're better CEOs, they're better managers, they're better friends, they're better negotiators, potentially better diplomats. And I think it's because of these values. So how do we go about changing this narrative that these skills aren't fundamentally essential to a better, more impactful world?
Absolutely love that question. Who wants to take the Donald Trump question?
I can have a go, a little bit of a go, because it links to the second question as well. So I think we really mustn't fall into the trap of thinking that we're somehow like a second version or less, less good. So my thing with Donald Trump would also link to the kind of broader questions as well, which is one of the magic things about our modern world is data and information. And instead of telling yourselves lots of lies about why people do X or Y or Z, or who in fact spends money, or who controls things, the actual power that the women's pound has, the actual impact that women leadership has, you can see it. So one of the weird things I've done since I left government as a banker for a bit.
Were you?
Yeah, I was, I know, Menna, sorry, hi. I haven't caught up for a while. So I did a bit of investment banking, mainly in football, which was also quite fun. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because one of the things that would happen is when you were looking at the valuation of a company, or you were looking at kind of what you needed to understand in order to make something work, quite often the nugget of information will come that actually it's women consumers, it's women purchasers, it's women decision makers that are really important. So therefore equals, in this very cynical, like there's no smooth or softness around it at all, it's like what is going to be the thing that's going to maximise the value. There's a kind of hard forcing to, therefore equals, you have to have more women in the room, you have to do things. So for Donald Trump, there are a lot of women that vote, actually. And women, I think this is true, it certainly was the last time I looked at it, that women vote actually on aggregate in democracies more than men do. Certainly in Western democracies. So there is a thing about actually, if you really want to, discuss whether he is actually going to have another election and all those other things, that actually women's voices in democracy and participation matter. And my experience of politicians, and I have been in some conversations that involve Donald Trump, but not, thinking of other adjacent politicians perhaps, is that you've got to find a way of talking to them where they are, especially if you do the sorts of jobs that we did, which is that your job is not to second guess who's voted for them or do, whatever else, but is to try and meet them somewhere where they are. And quite often, the really powerful thing that women can bring is the data and information that shows you might think that we are this because that is your mindset and that's the world that you've grown up in and that's all of your priors. But actually, hello, in the modern world, this is who we are. And we're actually much more in charge and much more powerful than you think we are. So maybe listen a bit more.
Brilliant, thank you. Anyone want to add to either of those?
I mean, just in relation to that, when Trump got in for the second term, there was quite a lot in the newspapers about how many women had voted for him. Of the MAGA world, most women had voted for him. And the reason that they was quoted, I mean, who knows whether this is true and whether any statistics were ever really taken, but that apocryphally, that reporting afterwards said it was women voting on behalf of their sons because they felt that he was going to create a world in which their sons would thrive. And I thought that was fascinating. And for me, it throws up the fact that although we're talking about being women and the experience of being women in all sorts of spheres, we are not actually divided from men. We are intrinsically and deeply connected as a group of as members of our society, and so I think the statistics is really, really interesting, and that what Helen was talking about, that kind of the illusion of power versus the reality of power. I'd love to hear more about that. That sounded very interesting. we have to see ourselves as benefiting the society as a whole, and finding routes to that. And actually statistics, I think, are a very, very good way to do it. Because I think if those women had been presented with some statistics, they might then think, oh, actually, my son is not going to benefit from the Trump universe.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Joanna. So the only thing I was going to add was I completely agree on the data and evidence, and there's plenty of evidence out there. Going back to your point about businesses doing better with women in the leadership positions as well as men. So it does a direct correlation with more prosperous, more secure countries, more profitable companies as well. So I think we obviously need to do better at telling that story. And there's also something about the future with the direction of travel for data. And you look at kind of some of the major demographic challenges that we're facing when you've got sort of ageing populations in many countries, and that burden of sort of people living longer and therefore sort of getting sicker and being more expensive. You need a working population which is productive, and you need to be able to have be able to sort of draw on all the talent and enable women as well as men. I mean, you basically look at it purely in terms of 50% of the population, then if you're not kind of getting the most out of your whole population, then you're not going to be able to cope with some of the massive demographic challenges that we've got heading in our direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, we'll take two more. I'm going to try to get to the back of the room in a sec, but let's just take one on the front row, Marla and Anna, and then we're going to go back, I promise.
Hi, I'm Marla. I'm a fellow here at Queen's. Thanks for the conversation. I just was curious, kind of looking at the Pantone of the room, and I think it certainly affects all the sectors that you are all in, is how women who are not of colour can open doors for women of colour.
Yeah, got it. Thank you very much. And Anna?
Hi. So, as some of you might know, I'm a porter here, and I've come out of school with no qualifications, never been to university or anything like that. Worked as a cleaner. Went on to decide I didn't want to stay on a council estate because of all the problems that were there. Went and did a social work qualification and worked with very many disenfranchised people, mainly women who are looking after their children. And one of the things that it's not really a question, I mean obviously if somebody wants to make a comment, that's of course fine. It's not really a question, but more of a statement about impactful women, for me, comes from the bottom. So I'm talking about mothers, the people who are in the main, people who have to care for children. You know, we're in an unpaid group. We do not all of it, most of the unpaid work for looking after older relatives. And I just wanted to put mothers and people who have big impact on children here in the room, if you like.
Yeah. Brilliant. I think perhaps we'll take one more and then come back to the panel. So hold on to any thoughts you've got so far. Can we go up a bit? Up a bit. There's an orange jumper right there.
Hi, I'm a first year undergraduate at Queen's. Quite eager to follow in many of your footsteps. I'm thinking more in terms of our experiences that we're quite often going to probably encounter, and also with the rise of kind of this radical backlash, as Menna mentioned at the beginning, with feminism and it becoming a kind of controversial word. How do you kind of encounter, if you have, the challenges of patriarchal rhetoric in terms of you're too loud or you're too sassy, which is, I know it's something that I've encountered even just at school, but I don't know, going into those kind of high profile jobs, how do you find that?
Brilliant, thank you very much. Yeah, here's the loud and sassy women. Necessary, absolutely. So I just throw any sort of pick and mix. You can take any of those questions. So we had the question about supporting people of colour, women of colour. We had Anna's point, I know it wasn't a question, but a very well made point about, you know, the mothers and the women who care, often in unpaid capacities for others. And then, yeah, the question about sort of how do we cope with being called things in a negative way, like loud, sassy, aggressive,
Direct.
direct. Yes.
All of those.
I'll try and roll up those three into
Go
one
for it.
answer.
Oh, Angela, go.
Just trying to make connections. Wow. So I think the answer is in allyship, that actually we all have these cross-cutting ties, women, mental health, illness, caring responsibilities, and actually to become aware of those in your team, but aware that your experience of those things will be different. You know, the disadvantage that you experience will be different depending on your starting point. But actually, I found as a manager, often of men and women of colour, usually in those teams, actually just discovering in an open conversation our points of commonality, our points of difference and difficulty has been really useful. And that allyship in how you speak up and how you show up for other people in your immediate vicinity has been the most important thing.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Can I say something about the sassy woman thing? Okay, so one thing that I have really noticed in making social media videos is the kind of conversation that is happening. And in a lot of ways, I think that you guys here who are sort of students now, I think that you have it better than the people here on this panel in some ways, but I also think you have it a lot worse. Because I think that the rhetoric, as you describe, right, the kind of the types of insults that get thrown and the stages on which they get thrown are just, I think that there's something quite nasty that's going on right now that actually it was there, but it was much more hidden, I think, when we were coming through. And I think this is noticeable, particularly online. I mean, actually, personally, I find it quite funny when people go for me online now. But when it first started, I mean, the first time someone said something horrible to me online, I cried for about 2 days. But now I have a little folder on my computer where I screenshot the best ones. some absolute blinders, honestly. My favourite one, I'm sorry, forgive me, was someone came across one of my videos. I was talking about economics. I had screenshotted it, put it on Twitter. And said, I'm sick of all of these TikTok women with their big eyes telling me about stories. Are my eyes not pretty? Anyway, my favourite thing about it was that someone else who I'd never met, never spoken to, had screenshotted that and then retweeted it and said, she's literally the president of the Institute of Mathematics. What more do you possibly want to respect somebody? Anyway, that's in my folder. But I don't do anything bad. But I just want to go back, actually, slightly to the question about empathy that we were talking about earlier. Because I was working with Louis Theroux last week about a programme that he's been doing about the manosphere and about how actually algorithms have had this impact on young men. But also I think the way that society has shifted, it has sometimes, I think, felt to young men and mothers of young men that it's not just that we want to bring ourselves up to the same level, but that actually we're trying to put them down. And I do think that actually that has been capitalised on by the sort of outrage machine of the algorithms. It's extremely profitable to be out there in the manosphere selling this idea of just outright misogyny. And I think that actually it's very easy to really other those people who find themselves, shouting at women in the way that young men sometimes are now. But I actually think also, I think that there are young men who are kind of victims in this as well. Maybe victims is a bit strong, but I think that actually society hasn't done anybody any favours in what we've allowed to happen, either men or women. And I don't think that further polarisation is the answer. I don't think it gets us out of it. So actually, when people do, for instance, go for me or or people I work with online, I do think actually trying to look at it from a sort of, I mean, if you really want to comfort yourself, you can look at them with pity, but maybe empathy is the slightly healthier way to approach it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any other comments on that?
So just I agree with all of that. This is so much fun. Thank you. But to be a bit more practical answer to your question about how do you cope with it, actually one of the things that I found really useful was to write it all down, she says, ever the bureaucrat. But actually, when I found that we wrote down all of the words that women and women of colour found themselves described, how they've been described, and we did actually a bit of a trawl on people's appraisals even of the language that had been used, and we were able to show this is what is said about successful women, this is what is said about successful men, and literally, she says, force, and I do mean force, the senior men in question to like actually have to look back at how they were describing things and then relentlessly call it out. And that's the kind of my segue into your question, which is that if you find yourself in a position of power, however small it is, you need to use it to make it fairer and better for people. So the answer to what do white women need to do for women of colour is relentlessly treat it as their job, relentlessly treat it as your job to open the door further, to make the opportunity to do anything. The only time in my civil service career that we were ever successful at trying to change the representative of what is a horribly white organisation at senior levels, given the demographic of where it comes from, even more so, was to just make sure that actually you weren't going to get a top box this year unless you change the makeup of this. There you go. As if by magic, these things happen.
Could I add something to... Sorry, Joanna, go ahead.
Go on. No.
I just want to add something to that point, because often, I've run a lot of diversity schemes, and often we sort of treat it as if it is the person from the underrepresented background that needs to be trained or fix themselves. And that's not really the case. Wherever we've done work like that, which is like you don't get your bonus, you don't get a promotion unless you've done these things. You have to train the other people, not to other them. And that is always quite successful. And actually, the more we do these kind of ring-fenced diversity schemes where you're trying to train somebody to compensate for the ills or imbalances of society, you will never really succeed through those. It's not that I don't think they should exist, but there has to be a kind of yin to the yang of them.
I totally, and also then the magic that happens is if you do manage to build these teams which are based on the most talented people available, and then they're super successful, you go, look at this, look what happens when you just find the most talented people, not the people that you thought might be the most talented people. So I'd say that. And the last thing I'd say about your point about caring, so I think it's really important. In my most optimistic self, I think that if in this era of AI, what we might see is starting to value caring as a thing that actually, because you can't replicate that with a robot, I'm afraid. Much as you can, there's all sorts of empathetic things you can do with anthropomorphic LLMs. But the thing that is massively and wildly undervalued in our society, and it costs us through everything, is women's work and the work of caring. And magically, maybe, all of these, I remember trying to explain to a man in the Cabinet Office, which these two will know how particularly challenging this is, that it was a construct, what salaries were and that it was a totally invented thing, that digital skills were paid more than caring skills, and that was a thing that we decided as a society, and it didn't mean that you worked less hard if you were caring. Didn't work on that one either, but I think there is something about maybe one of the optimistic things we could look to is the real humanity of care and love, and the work of love, which people do, whether that's children or friends or family or elderly relatives. That's hopefully something that will be valued more.
Which brings us back to the wonderful second wave feminism and the Wages for Housework campaign, which was really strong and really big, and it was taken very seriously at the time and then smashed to smithereens by, I guess, the kind of deregulation of the markets, I think, first and foremost. But I just wanted to stress about the sort of civil discourse. How do we try to make any contribution towards civil discourse? How do we accept difference? And the three questions, I think, thank you very much for them, because they bring in something essential around respect and definitions of how we seek to respect and be respected. Personally, to the SAS question, I just don't care. I just don't care what anybody says about me. I am angry. I care in the sense that I feel angry. I can feel it right now. But I just will not take it on. I just refuse. And I just push back. And I just say, I'm not interested in your comment. And my husband would say to you, she's a nightmare because she just won't accept. I'm not polite if people are rude in that sense. And I can't find another way through. I've tried other methods, but I just refuse to take that reality. And I think the other question about difference and how we work together within difference is that, particularly in the workplace, what I find is that I might have emotional responses. As an actor, of course I do, that's my stock in trade. But to somebody who is defined as other, or I am othering in myself. And what I've discovered through just lived experience of essential opening of your sort of self, which you have to do as an actor, otherwise it doesn't work, is that I find in the commonality of our endeavour, in the thing that we are doing together, even if I personally dislike or am frightened by or am in some way challenged by another person, that those things can fall away. But it relies upon us sharing a common endeavour. And I think the ability to articulate that common endeavour and to negotiate it is an essential part of meeting the inequalities and the privileges that some have over others in the workplace.
Absolutely, well said. Now, we are really running out of time. I knew this would happen. We always get so much energy around the questions. So I think we'll just take 2 more. And please be fast if you can. And we promise we'll be fast too. Sorry? Oh, a young man with a question. Yes, so we'll go to the young man. Good spot, thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm Corin MPhil at Cambridge. So I have a question for Hannah. So currently you mentioned about safeguards. So is there a way to quantify emotions as boundary conditions in algorithms?
Great question. Oh, that is such a mathematical question.
Yes, it is, yeah. Can you put it in layperson's terms for me, please?
Okay, wait, say it again for me. So the way to quantify emotions as safeguards
Yes,
in the
so how do you
equations.
quantify qualitative
Yeah.
and subjective factors as quantitative metrics in AI?
Yeah. Okay, all right, so what you can do, okay, let me try and say it in a slightly different way. So one of the things that you can do, one of the things that was really noticeable when you first were using something like ChatGPT was that it was unbelievably sycophantic. Everything you'd write would be like, you are so smart, these are great ideas, like, wow, you really thought this through, it's absolutely amazing. Okay. Now,
mine didn't do that.
This is a well-studied song. Okay. Anyway, the problem with that is that then you think your idea is great. You end up in sort of self-reinforcing. You end up in this process of self-radicalization. It can be a really big problem. Another type of personality, which they have tried but sort of doesn't work, is if it's just much more critical and is like, no, I don't think that's a very good idea. Whatever. It's just like pushes back. Nobody wants to use that. Okay, it's sort of not fun to be around. So what people have been doing is they have been trying to effectively quantify, sort of create if you imagine it like a surface, right, of different personalities, and over here you've got someone who's super duper sycophantic, and over here in this other sort of parameter space you've got something that is like very robust and critical and so on and so on. So this is one thing that people have been trying to do, because we know that really sycophantic is extremely dangerous, but we also know that over here, super critical, nobody wants to play around with it. So what you may have seen people trialling now is, different companies trialling, is that you can change the personality of your agent, right? And so what people have been doing is both quantifying the personality, but also trying then to quantify the way that it feels to you as an individual. Eugenia, who started Replica, her big thing that she, as you said, you mentioned knowing her, her big thing was that she wanted to, instead of like building algorithms that maximize for our time that we spend on a platform or our attention or the number of reels that we're watching or whatever, she instead wanted it to be maximizing for human flourishing, which is a notoriously difficult thing to try and quantify, but there are groups at MIT and Harvard in particular who have done a lot of work in trying to put numbers on this so that then you can put that into the algorithm and say that's the thing that you should care about, rather than just how many answers you're giving, how many responses, how many tokens, whatever, the kind of the boring kind of numerical stuff.
I've got a contribution to this mathematical question. I've worked out who's worked it out, and it's couch to 5k. So I know it's on couch to 5k. You can choose your agent.
Right.
So last time I did it, when I hurt one knee, had Denise Lewis, but she was a little bit like athletic for me. So I'm doing it again. I've got Jo Wiley.
Jo Wiley's she's the best. She's the best catch.
So, you know, so we can tell that to MIT and Harvard. Just with the British couch to 5K.
Have you done the zombies one, where zombies chase you down the road? I find that as a big
terrifying.
It's horrifying. Maybe fear is the ultimate driver.
Maybe that is, yeah. We can do one last very quick question. Let's go to Emma in the middle. Sorry, everyone else.
Hello, my name's Emma, and I was alongside Jo in the first cohort way back. My question is for all the panel. I think all of you have been pioneering, and whatever level you've been at, you've looked at the next level and not seen anybody like you. That was certainly the case for me. I became a doctor, and I just wondered, the answer for me was mentorship. It's been very, very helpful in my career. And I wondered if you could share any examples of mentorship in your lives.
Brilliant. This is a lovely question to finish on. Corin, we'll just come around the whole panel.
Thank you for asking. I was going to jump in earlier on the opening doors with saying I think it can be so powerful that both seeking a mentor, being mentored, but also it's that giving back. And I think the theme of International Women's Day this year is give to gain. That how do you open doors for people coming up behind you? And I think being able to, you learn a lot about yourself through mentoring other people as well. But actually, it really does help. Mentoring and sponsorship can make a massive difference. So yeah, I've been the beneficiary of mentoring and also done a lot myself. But I do think that's important. I think there's talking about diplomacy, a Madeleine Albright quote, former US Secretary of State, that said there's a special place in hell for women that don't help those women coming up behind them. And I think there's something to be said for that, actually. So thank you.
I mean, yes, massively benefited from other people's help and guidance and courage, and have tried to pay that back. I think the thing that I would say is that you can sometimes think, well, maybe I haven't got any advice to give, or maybe I don't know enough, or who am I to help somebody else or mentor someone else? And I think I benefited the civil service is quite structured in lots of ways, and one of the things it does is it kind of pushes you into things like doing mentoring when you're quite early on in your career, especially if you're a woman. There's not very many women leaders, so you kind of get jammed into doing all sorts of different things. And I massively learnt a lot from that actually, you might think, well, I can't possibly help somebody else or guide somebody else because I haven't done X or Y or Z. And don't think like that, because you learn so much and you benefit so much from the act of doing it as well as the act of asking. I had the experience the other day where I was puzzling over what I should do on something, and one of my friends said to me, what about this? I was like, oh, that's really great advice. She was like, you gave me that advice 15 years ago. I was like, never listen to myself.
I think the other thing alongside mentorship is kind of peer mentorship, if that makes any sense. I think that you can find your tribe and they can pull you can all pull each other along together, ultimately. I think it's about finding spaces where you feel celebrated rather than tolerated, and making sure that you are giving that support to other people at exactly the same time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the areas in my industry which women have really lagged behind in terms of taking up the reins and being honoured is women directors. That is still extremely sluggish. I mean, I think Chloe Zhao is in the list of films for the Oscars forthcoming in a couple of weeks, but I think she's the only woman on that list. It's a really big problem, and there are lots of reasons for that. I mean, I'd love to get into that one because it's not without it's having worked within the industry for so long, I can see why and where the problems lie. It's not a simple nut to crack. But one of the things that I do is in terms of, like, you could talk about acting or directing, till the cows come home, but in the end it's an action. It's a doing thing. And so if a woman director who wants to make a short film is looking for a leading actor, I will always, pretty much always, if it's possible, to say yes, and then put yourself in the situation where you're their guinea pig, if you like, and try and be you know, I've regretted it on in moments in the process, because the inexperience is, you know, part of what we're dealing with. But actually, I've never regretted it ultimately, because you have to do that thing, to make that mistake, to learn what's going on, and to get the money together for a crew of, you know, at the smallest level, 30 people, 20 or 30 people, and at most levels 60 to 150 people, and to be the one who's in charge of that team, you need other women who are going to be there and let you, you know, use them. They can use me as their dolly in the doll's house, and I'm very happy to do that. So it's a form of mentoring.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
I have a good mentoring story. I was mentored once by the CEO. I was very lucky to get him. And he said, Angela, you were on this sort of path with a gold star against your name, and then you had children, and then you had twins. And I did, and they were born prematurely. I had to take 18 months off. And he said, what you need to do is imagine your line like this. And I thought, yes, life is probably like that for you. And he was a wonderful mentor and so kind. And I don't want to take anything away from that, but I thought, actually, one thing I can do is not ever tell anyone that life is like this. You know, like everybody, I've had to stop and start through illness, loss, grief, mental health conditions. I think the best thing you could do to mentor the industry and those with you is to say life ain't like that. It's up and down, and we come back again and again. We reinvent ourselves in these cycles of rebirth all the time. It is not linear. And I think that's the most important message you can do to help anybody, women or men, coming up behind you.
Absolutely brilliant note to finish on. Can we just have a huge round of applause for this amazing project?